our subtitle, Applying Transformative Leadership. We are glad you could join us today. We are a podcast for leaders and by leaders. We're going to interview the best and the brightest of leaders to be able to provide you information. We're here to inform, to instruct, and to inspire you on your leadership journey. My name is Ted Davis. My company is Grace Strategic Services, Inc. We're proud to be the sponsor of this podcast. And we encourage you to take the information that we're going to share, make it your own, absorb it, then reflect on it. What does it mean to you? And finally commit to an action plan. So with that, let's get started with today's episode. I'll go solo today and talk about a topic that I hope you're going to find interesting. It's about leadership and grace and truth. How does grace and truth apply to leadership? Now, you may have heard this phrase, grace and truth, in a religious context. A lot of Christ followers talk about it because it's an important blend of living out the faith. But that's not going to be my extreme focus today. It's applicable to any leader, whatever your faith is or non-faith. It does apply, and I think you'll learn a little bit about that today. Now, how did I come to this topic? Well, somebody was asking me about the history of my company, Grace Strategic Services. You see the logo here. How did I come up with the name Grace? I want to share a story just shortly and then get into the topic. So why Grace? Why Grace Strategic Services? Well, the short answer is because God is gracious. When I first got started starting to think, okay, what's the name of this company going to be? And I was really trying to search out something that was going to be meaningful to me as well as, to my clients. And I just couldn't come up with anything. So I thought, well, okay, I'm going to open up a Bible and I'm just going to point to something, and just find a word. Well, that obviously doesn't work. But nonetheless, as I was sitting there at a different office and I was thinking about it, I turned around to reach for a Bible that was behind me and I was going to pull it out, open it up and see if there's something that jumped out at me. But I was saying that to myself. I was just thinking, the job I had was my first job after retirement. It had just gone away because the company was highly leveraged. The board told the president he had to cut the size of the workforce. And so all of us officers who were not family members, we were terminated. So I'm going through the first job I have after Army life, after retirement. And now I'm losing that. So as I was thinking about it, in the midst of all that, I was thinking, the Lord has really been gracious. And that's when it hit me. That's what I'm going to call it, grace. At first, it was Grace Consulting Services, and then years later, when I incorporated, I changed it to Grace Strategic Services, Inc., and been happy with that choice ever since. So that's a little bit about how we settled on that name. It's not Davis Consulting or Davis Strategic Services. It's Grace Strategic Services. So that's the story. But let's talk a little bit about grace and truth. What do they mean to leaders, regardless of where you are? Now, one of my favorite books on leadership is Kouzes and Posner's book, The Leadership Challenge. I think it's in its like 6th edition now. Marvelous book, just a classic. And as I tell people, if you're only going to read one book on leadership, that's a mistake. But if you're going to make that mistake, then choose Kouzes and Posner's The Leadership Challenge. And in the book, one of the things that really excited me about it is that the leaders talk about that leadership is a performing art. And people don't willingly follow a title. They follow people engaged in a process. They're engaged in a relationship. So they stress that leadership is a performing art and that it's about the relationship with people. Well, because it's a relationship between the leader and the follower. That's why I think these two attributes of grace and truth are incredibly important. So what do we mean by these? Well, I love the short answer for the definition of grace. It's courteous goodwill. Grace is courteous goodwill. Think about that, what that means. So it's about the behavior. So grace is about the behavior and the relationship. Truth is about the facts and about the reality. So I think truth provides the structure. So grace and truth are distinct, different roles in leadership. Grace is that courteous goodwill. It influences the behavior within the relationship. It's fostering empathy and compassion. But on truth, and I think we've got to have these both, that's the whole purpose of today's podcast, is the blend, the harmonization of grace and truth. Truth is the framework for the relationship. It ensures honesty and integrity. So understanding the contrast, but yet the harmonization, these two are incredibly important. So grace, I think, manifests itself in several behaviors. First off, I'm going to go through 5 dyads, 5 combination. I think of skills of behaviors that make up this idea of grace. First is empathy and understanding. Leaders demonstrate grace, I think, when they have empathy and they strive to understand, truly understand where team members' emotions and their perspectives and so forth. That does not require agreement. Effective communication is always about a shared understanding, not necessarily shared agreement. Persuasion is about agreement. Just simply effective communication is that we share each other's story. We understand each other's perspectives. So empathy is that idea of listening to understand to the point where you understand the other person's concern. You really want to understand their well-being and so forth. The second dyad is kindness and compassion. Graceful leaders provide encouragement and they provide positive reinforcement by boosting morale, by motivation. And they do that, small acts of kindness, of expressing appreciation, noting performance success, keeping people informed, and understanding again, where are they coming from and being compassionate about it. Now, again, it's going to be grace with compassion being one of it, but we're going to we're going to harmonize it with truth in just a second. So we've got empathy and understanding, kindness and compassion. And then the third dyad is patience and forgiving. Leaders who embody grace understand that mistakes are part of nature. They're going to happen. So there's enough patience with people as they learn, and forgiveness. Forgiveness can be a whole new topic we'll cover someday in a full podcast, because there's far more than just simply saying, oh, you're forgiven. And forgiveness does not roll back the clock. Forgiveness does not diminish the consequences of a bad act. But nonetheless, to be graceful in leadership, you've got to have the right amount of patience and forgiveness. And again, you're going to blend that with the truth, as we're going to talk about in a second. The fourth pairing is poise and resolve. So graceful leaders adapt to handling conflicts and challenges, and they do it with poise. And I'm sure you've all seen, I know I have many times seen somebody that, boy, when the pressure is on, the things are falling apart, they rant, they rave, they throw things, they slam things, they express their emotions with a disruptive, inflammatory behavior that doesn't help the situation. But to be able to face challenges with poise, keeping your emotions in check. It's one thing to be enraged, but then to act on rage is destructive. You want to recognize, okay, I'm enraged, but how do I get that emotion back down to I'm incredibly upset. I am absolutely furious with what happened, but I don't act foolishly. So you act with poise. You have a resolve so that you maintain the harmony with the kind of culture you're trying to create. And the opposite of resolve or poise, the anger, that absolutely destroys a organizational culture. And then fifthly, I think this one is magnificent: humility and strong will. And probably the best little piece about humility and strong will comes from Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to read that. Good to Great, magnificent book. In fact, I had a podcast several months ago talking about Maxwell's 5 levels of leadership and Collins' 5 levels of leadership. And with Collins, level 5 leadership, he talks about this paradoxical blend of humility and strong will. So that humility encourages a culture of continuous improvement, where team members are not afraid to take risks, legitimate risks, of course, to innovate and to remain steadfast in pursuing excellence. So when we can add those 2 elements in the relationship, again, this is about grace in the relationship. How do I exercise kindness, compassion, patience, and forgiveness, poise, resolve, humility, and strong will? I've got to leverage all of them together. So that's the grace part of it. Now, in the truth part of this combination, truth, again, in leadership is the structural integrity that's needed. It encompasses the facts, the figures, the expectations, the measurable results, the nature of the market, the dynamics, the trends and forces, all that stuff is the truth. I mean, what is actually happening? What's measurable out there? What's the truth about what the balance sheet is telling you? What's the truth about the production rates? What's the truth about the performance? What is the truth about what our expectations were and so forth? So they absolutely provide the baseline, the structure for how do we have this relationship? Because the expectations, the plans, the contracts, the markets that we're going to serve, the guiding principles, the culture that we articulate in a well-formed cultural document, all that provides a structure within which we're going to operate. Now, I think there's, again, three dyads of attributes that make up this truth. I think number one is you've got to have honesty and transparency. Leaders who prioritize truth. Now, what is the truth? I'm going to seek it out. Tell me what exactly was happening. You're going to get to the root cause of a problem. You're not going to wash over. You're not going to just simply, okay, you made a mistake. We're going to get by it. No, you made a mistake. Now let's figure out what was that mistake? Why did it happen? How do we prevent it from happening? Again, we're trying to harmonize grace and truth. So in the truth, we may have to do some digging to find out what was happening. So we want to honestly and transparently look for and have a clear understanding of what's the situation, what's the accurate information, what are the realistic expectations, what's the forthright challenges and changes that are taking place. So transparency, we share what we're thinking, we share what's happening, we share the data. That fosters trust. When we get all of the information out, all the information that can be, there's levels of information that protects, like oftentimes employment information. You're not going to give everybody the full explanation of why somebody was terminated for cause. You just can't do that. So there is some information that can't be shared, but to the extent possible, we want to be transparent to be able to foster trust, and to have people feel like they have a sense of I'm informed. So honesty and transparency, I think, are an essential part of providing truth within the organization. Secondly, I think it's integrity and consistency. You have them both together. So truthful leaders act with integrity. What you say, you do. Your word and deed match. We do what we tell people. We're consistent. We're consistent in upholding values and principles, ensuring our actions align with our words. So this consistency builds credibility and trust. And that's essential to, obviously, the teamwork. And then the third pairing is accountability and responsibility. An essential part of good leadership is accountability. Making sure we assign someone the responsibility. Here's what you have control over. I'm going to give you a right amount of decision. Here's the decisions you can make. And when I give you decisions, when I give you a responsibility, I give you the right amount of authority that goes with it. And now that I give you both responsibility and authority to get those results done, I'm going to hold you accountable to it. So accountability and responsibility go together. It involves embracing. Here's what I said. Here's the clear expectations. Here's what I gave you as an area for you to make decisions, to get results. And now that I've given you the responsibility, I'm going to give you the accountability. And we've got to be able to make our accountability a desired thing. Too often when I hear leaders talk about accountability, it's something they want to shy away from because they feel like, oh my gosh, it's only a way to blame me for something. No, accountability needs to be a positive. I want to be accountable to my boss because she gives me credit when credit is due. She gives me resources. She listens. She helps me solve problems. It is a good thing to be accountable to my boss. So both of those things need to be brought together. So I think that's the background about grace and truth. Now, how do we harmonize them? So we're going to have a chart here up on the screen, and I call it the grace and truth spectrum. So you see grace on the left, truth on the right. The shading shows how they blend. At first, I was thinking of using the yin and yang symbol. I'm sure you're familiar with that. But as I was looking at, okay, yin and yang, two things that are contrasting and put together. Well, actually, they're opposites. Yin and yang says opposite things that seem to go together. Well, great truth is not the opposite of grace. The opposite of truth is falsehood. The opposite of grace is rudeness. Grace and truth are not opposite things. They are absolutely supposed to work together. And you've got to be able to balance. So what time situation do I use more grace than truth, and the other way around? When do I use more truth than grace? So let me share a couple of examples. So you can see in our chart here, grace and truth spectrum. Am I farther to the left, I have a little more grace, or am I farther to the right, I really got to maintain the accountability. So a friend of mine, Anthony, was a facility manager at a large fulfillment center where efficiency and continuous operations are absolutely critical. Got to go forward, constant operations to make this thing work. And one day, one of his most junior employees, who was responsible for their routine fire suppression system testing, made a mistake in the shut off, and it absolutely ruined the inspection, and it shut down the system. The whole system throughout the plant was shut down. It was a system-wide failure. And, in their business, they knew for a fact that if we shut this thing down, 15 minutes is going to cost us $30,000. So it was no small mistake that this happened. So they obviously scrambled, figured out what it was, got the thing back up, but now all's been lost for at least 15 to 20 minutes and so forth. So nonetheless, Anthony was pretty infuriated. I really was upset, but he saw this. I got to exercise both grace and truth. So the young employee, I think his name was George, was absolutely horrified about what happened. He could just see his life and his career is going to be doomed. They're passing before his eyes. And so he had enough character, though. George, the guy who made the mistake, had enough courage and enough responsibility. He stood up to the plate and took responsibility. I made the mistake. Well, then Anthony firmly and patiently explained the consequences of the mistake. But then they looked at what happened. Why was this mistake made? They were using as, okay, what went wrong? What could have been done to prevent it? I mean, they did an after-action review where they're looking for lessons learned. And then kind of Anthony summarizes, saying, looking at his young protege there, saying, George, now we both know what not to do when we inspect the fire system. We've learned a valuable lesson. And so you've learned, I've learned. So I'm sure we're not going to make it again. And basically, he walked the young man through a learning exercise. Huge mistake. They got it fixed. But then what went wrong? Let's figure out. Let's look at it. So he looked at the truth. What was the known procedure? What was done wrong? What was out of whack? Why did we cause this thing? What was its consequences? So Anthony walked through. Here is all of the truth of the expectations, what was happening, what it's cost us. Here's all the negative side of what this problem was causing. But then at the end of it, he exercised grace. As you see in the side, in the middle, he blended grace and truth. But what did Anthony do? He went to the left of center. He blended grace to this young man who was at least responsible enough to admit his mistake, and he was able to teach him. Here's what we do. So that grace helped Anthony develop young George. And as I understand it, George went on to be having a very successful career with the company. So that's an example where we leaned more to the left with grace. Now, for my story, I assumed an executive position with a company. And as soon as first problem I walked into, had a employee who had a very good reputation, was very good with customers, a very talented guy, knew the business. A lot of people absolutely loved him. Unfortunately, what he had done was spread some rumors about a young lady in the organization. So unfortunately, his male ego led him to foolishly and maliciously claim that he had a sexual relationship with this young lady. And the rumors were quite disheartening and quite devastating. So I walk in within the first week, people started explaining what was happening, and I had to investigate. So in our next little chart there, I started in the middle. right in the middle, grace, truth. I got to find out the facts. And so the more I learned about what was happening, my focus was on the act of spreading the rumors, because I didn't want to get sidetracked and get into a did he or didn't he, because that would have been, he said, she said, and so forth. Needless to say, she denied the relationship, but he was spreading the rumors, and the damage to the organization at the time was the maliciousness of the rumors and the disrespect. So I had suspended him so I could do a thorough investigation, and came to the conclusion that was pretty well, the evidence was he had been spreading malicious rumors. So I went from being in the center, walking in, having to investigate this, to now I got to find out what's true. Okay, it's malicious. It's damaging. He has violated all the policies and procedures condemning sexual harassment, and that's what it was a form of. And there was no issue about forgive me. And we could forgive him, but that doesn't mean the consequences go away. Forgiveness doesn't always mean that someone doesn't pay the consequences for their poor deed. And in this case, that's what happened. So I had to go, as you can see on the chart, I went from center to clearly truth of the rumors and the maliciousness and what the damage was caused me to do that. The rumors and the maliciousness and what the damage was caused me to do that. And so that's a little bit of some thoughts today about grace and truth. I hope it's been helpful. It stimulates your ideas and investigate. What does that mean? So here's the three things I'd encourage you to do. As you know, each podcast, I like to encourage people to do at least three things. Well, number one thing, and we haven't talked about it specifically in today's conversation, but number one thing I think you need to do is develop an attitude of gratitude. Gratitude is so important, I think, to understanding grace and truth. When you have a sense of gratitude about what's happening, you develop a sense of healthy relationships, health for the organization. I'm going to continue to talk about gratitude because I think it's so important. I love positive psychology, where Martin Seligman, the founder of positive psychology, really talks about gratitude in such glowing terms and how important it is to live a fulfilling life. So number one, I think, to be able to balance grace and truth, develop an attitude of gratitude. Secondly, I'd recommend, there's a book by Gary Harmonizing. It's called The 5 Graces of Life and Leadership. I'm going to have that on the slide. I have the link. You can download it from Amazon. But he writes about 5 factors. Now, he focuses simply on grace, but I think it's a good book. It's a quick read. He talks about gratitude. There's that idea again. He talks about gratitude, resilience. We talked a little bit about that today. Gratitude, resilience, aspiration, courage, and empathy. And so 3 out of that 5 I've talked about today. So it's a short book, but I think it's a very good book, The 5 Graces of Life and Leadership. I encourage you to read it. And then the third action item today is also a reading. I encourage you to read an article about how truth is a powerful trait for leaders, and it's on a website called crowdspring.com. So we're going to have that link up here for you, but talks about the power of pursuing truth and living a life of integrity and transparency. So I encourage you those 3 things. Develop a sense of gratitude, read Brunson's book, The 5 Graces of Life and Leadership, and then read this article about how powerful truth is to a leader. Thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. God bless. Now I've got 3 ideas of what to share from today's podcast. So again, what I'd like for you to be able to do is take those ideas, make them your own, reflect on them. What do they mean to you? And then thirdly, commit to an action plan. Commit to actions that you can take to apply what we've talked about today. If you want help, if you want some ideas, if you want some accountability, please contact me. Contact me by sending me a text, 913-306-1499. Put podcast follow-up in the text message, and I'll get back to you within 24 hours. Thank you so much for listening today, and I'll see you on our next broadcast.